to have Melody Wright with us today. And most people's largest asset, Melody, is their home. And we've had a parabolic move in prices. After the '08, and you're a GFC survivor, I thought we'd have an echo bubble, but I never dreamed of surpassing those bubble highs, and we've done so by a ton. And so what a great time to have you here in front of the elections right before a new year. Melody Wright is a strategist. She's a writer, technologist, and more than that, a GFC one survivor. So welcome, Melody.
I thank you, Dale. I'm so happy to be here. I've been a fan for years. I've watched a lot of your videos, so I feel very privileged to be here with you guys today.
Well, back at you. So you called the GFC one, which to me implies there's another number coming.
That's correct.
So, all right. So, I want people to understand your journey and what were you doing before GFC one? Because you're not the only person that I've talked to that have become experts having experienced what they went through the great financial crisis. Luke Gromen happens to be another one who decided, hey, I have to figure this out now. I can't rely on salesmen that are my brokers. I want to know how this puzzle fits.
Right.
So, what were you doing before the financial crisis?
Yeah, so I was a failed academic, Dale. Basically, I always worked while I was in school. Even in high school, I had like three jobs, and so I grew up without a lot of money or no money actually, and so I had to pay for college. So I always worked full time. I was kind of working. I worked at the Wall Street Journal. I worked for a very private but elite investment banking firm, Allen and Company. Also worked for former Senator Bill Bradley, but all during that time I was in grad school for most of it, studying the IMF, or the International Monetary Fund, and kind of their impact on post-colonial nations through their loan programs, and really what that did to cultures when they took out those really punitive IMF loans, and how it kind of decimated them. So I had been studying all that. I was in an English department, which made no sense to anyone because I was talking about largely started talking about economics. And so I kind of said, this just isn't for me. I didn't want to talk about the same thing for the next 25 years of my life. And so I had to go get a job to pay my loans back. And
Okay.
so I applied for a project analyst job at a company in Minneapolis. I moved from New York City to Minneapolis, had some friends there. And the guy asked me, so what made you want to work at a mortgage company? And I said, this is a mortgage company. And I really had no idea, because as a project analyst, you can go just about anywhere and be successful. And so that was September of 2006, right
Okay.
before everything. I got to go to a party in October of 2006 where balloons were falling down from the ceiling, and we were walking around a life-size house made of Legos, and everybody was partying like it was Enron before they got caught. And
Right.
and so I went from that to immediately Cerberus had come in. They just finished a purchase of us, the mortgage unit, and they realized suddenly, oh my, we've overpaid. And so very quickly, my job just became Girl Friday to them, trying to help them understand the company, gather management reports, and really they wanted us to start taking write downs. And so we led the write downs of the last crisis almost by a year before Bank of
Yeah.
America and Chase did so. So pretty much, I had 1 month of normalcy, Dale, and then I hit the ground running, and it was just chaos from there. And we would come into the office and be like, we wrote down another 800 million yesterday, and then ultimately when the rating agencies decided to join the party, everybody started to kind of take their write downs. But I don't think there's any other time in history that I would have had an education like that, because very quickly we were laying off people in droves. And so the team became very small, but it was still a very large company. And I just had to learn things So I went from being a project analyst to when I left that role in financial planning and analysis, I was signing off on the ResCap financials because we no longer had a CFO, like before they got published for earnings or the 10Q or K. And then from there, I went on to a whole bunch of non-bank servicers and originators trying to help them get up to speed with everything that we had gone through during the regulatory cycle where the Fed came in with their consent orders over servicing practices, and then everybody then got on the same bandwagon, and the AGs kind of sued all the companies, and you had the AG settlement. So I went out trying to help people get up to speed, and what I realized is there just really wasn't any desire for that to really kind of walk these rules and how they were intended when they were constructed. And I got frustrated because, again, also I thought, hey, technology is the only way to go. So I partnered in building a lot of technology solutions, but the industry didn't seem interested. And then I went out to fintech to do that as well. And that's where one of my bosses said, can you please just tell me when rates are going to rise?
I see.
And so and also, why is the stock market up and this is going on? Like, everybody was just so confused. And that's when I really started diving back into macro and really trying to understand what the heck happened. Cause I remember very clearly being led, like pigs to slaughter in the last cycle. My leaders every year, 2008, 9, 10, 11, it's coming back. It's coming back,
Yeah.
the housing market, but they were listening to our mainstream economists and they were listening to the Fed. So I know that was long, but that's kind of a little summary
Well,
of
you got thrown right into the fire during one of the
that's right.
largest financial crises in U.S. history, and so were you caught in this cycle where sounds like you were too busy to be buying homes?
Oh, yeah. No, in this one or the previous one?
The previous one.
Yeah, no. I mean, and I was poor, so it didn't impact me at all. I had all these
Yeah.
people around me so upset. But I'm like, well, I didn't have any assets, so
Yeah.
I
Okay.
actually did much better during those years because, and all I did was work. And so yeah. But
The dollar during a recession or deflationary times goes further.
mhm,
We couldn't have imagined we'd be living. Well, we could imagine that we'd be living with the kind of price cycle we're in now. So, what I want to start with is a narrative that's been around for a long time, Melody. There's a shortage of supply. It's even working its way into politics with
politics.
what uh, Vice President Harris is proposing. It's almost like cash for clunkers, only it's homes. So I love the fact that you go
That's
to
right.
these areas to really look around. And that way you have firsthand evidence of what you're talking about because you see it with your own two eyes.
That's right.
So tell us what is going to create this massive amount of supply. And in this cycle, will BlackRock finally be forced to liquidate all the homes they bought that were repoed in 2008 to also add supply to the market?
Yeah. So quickly, the one thing I didn't talk about was how I got on the road, and that happened. I did all this macro work, and then I started, reading Bloomberg. And I woke up one morning, and Joe from Bloomberg was like, "The housing market's turning around." I was like, "Are you out of your mind?" Like, and so, and I was reading all these people I respected from the last cycle, and they weren't getting it, but I could see all these pieces. And so, because you could see things like the short term rental craze, the speculation, everybody went bananas. And it wasn't all on listing sites anywhere. People were selling homes on Facebook in 2 hours. And so you had so I'll call it the Airbnb, but short term rental is Airbnb, Vacasa. And so you just had everybody coming in, purchasing all these homes to Airbnb them. And then, of course, what you just referenced, Dale, in 2012, I witnessed it with my own eyes at an auction, Wall Street coming in and purchasing up all these properties for long term rental. So that had also happened. And then you were seeing the most building we've done since the 70s for multifamily as well as for single family residential and built for rent and we don't have the demographics to support it. And then on top of that, you have the boomers who are retiring at 10,000 a day, a lot of whom have second, third, fourth properties, and you have 15 million vacant properties in this country as of the last real census done. And that's not vacant. That's not abandoned. That's truly vacant second homes and things like that. And then you had this commercial real estate crisis that was like, okay, we're going to spend billions to convert, even though we know that that's a very difficult and only impacts a few. And then you had the fact that, wait a minute, yeah, maybe you could make some money off this asset, but now with property taxes and insurance
Yeah.
increasing, your cash flow is going out the window, and also the cost to repair your home. So all of that was, nobody was really talking about all those things. So I got on the road in January of 23, and I went out to places like Austin, Nashville, Charlotte, Florida, all over the place. And I realized we had no clue how much inventory was out there, none at all, because a lot of it wasn't listed. And so that's when I started digging into the listing sites, and like, why do they not have all this inventory? And realizing, builders don't list on most of the listing sites. They list one card for maybe 1,000 homes. And so, I really dove into all of the narratives. But we have so much inventory out there. It is insane. And we have so much vacant inventory. But like you say, politically, this whole shortage narrative has just been beaten to death. And by the way, you can go back to articles in the last crisis and see the same narrative
Yeah, it
about.
sounded like what you were talking about for 5 minutes is deja vu
Right,
today.
right.
Only is it on steroids?
It's on steroids. It's on
Okay.
absolute steroids. Yeah.
All right. All right. And you also talk about fraud from the
Oh, yes.
PPP loans. Uh, People were taking that money and they didn't and buying properties.
That's
And
right.
okay, so we have that potential supply out there with maybe some clawbacks. When is the general public going to start to get that what they thought they had? Because the talk is uh, wealth, all the
Mhm.
wealth that's tied up in home equity right now. So that's got to be exaggerated if what you're saying is happening on the ground, that a lot of people that have, like me at times, I have paper profits and then I'll wake up the next day and it's gone. Okay. So tell me, tell me, I've had a few mornings like that. So tell me when
When?
this is finally going to enter the consciousness of Americans so that they may be uh, at least trying to get out of this market right now. And is that what you would advise people to do? Is to sell and rent?
Yeah. So we're rounding the quarter, Dale. We had Florida and Texas.
Yeah,
I spent 2 months down in Miami last year and came back and said, "All eyes on my
yeah,
on Florida, guys! Like it's about to blow,"
yeah.
and certainly it did. And so you remember the phrase, Dale. Defaults are regional. Now it's inventory is regional. But that's just not true either. And so what I'm seeing now in California, non-seasonally, you're starting to see inventory increase, even when a lot of people like Altos and other publications said we were going to top, because seasonally you do typically top between June and September. But no, we're adding and adding and adding inventory in California. And now that California has joined, this will help. It's the largest housing market in the country. Awareness is probably going to arrive in spring of this year,
Okay,
because that is, the selling season for most places, not Florida, but it is the selling. But I think that, as we continue to increase inventory and we see sales slow, which by the way, sales are slower from a combined perspective, looking at both existing and new than 2007, 8, and 9 right now. And that's just something not a lot of people talk about because they want to talk about just year over year or month over month. And
yeah,
so, when do I see? I see the realization in spring. I see more motivated art folks are going to get their realization at the end of this year, because so many people look at that Zestimate. And I want to speak to that point, Dale, because
okay,
I also do mortgage finance. So it's not just about how many homes are there. I spent a lot of time in mortgage finance, And one thing that a lot of people aren't talking about is 1.8 million people took the payment deferral as a solution to the COVID forbearance. Now, what is that? It was those almost 2 years of forborne payments got put into kind of a non interest bearing lien and put at the back of the loan for you to pay off when you sell your home or you pay off your home. The problem is they didn't record them on public record. And so I remember filling out those spreadsheets for the Fed on what is my home equity, things like, what's that loan to
Yeah,
value right now. I cannot, no one can confirm with me, but I just looking at the math, there's no way those payment deferrals are being thought about. And so if you just think about that $2,000 payment, that's 48,000 for 2 years stuck at the back of the loan that nobody's talking about. And you can't find it on record. And so I think already the equity position is much lower than people think. And then you, on top of that, this is very important. Fannie Mae came out with a study itself, sent a letter to appraisals and said, you know what? We looked at 7 million appraisals or comps for in those appraisals, and
yeah,
55% of them didn't include seller concessions, inflating the value of the appraisal. And then on top of that, how many people waived appraisals, right? How many people waived inspections? And then how
yes,
many people, I saw this all over Austin. I see it here in Johnson City, Tennessee, where I live. People bought these homes to fix and flip, and then they ran out of money. And they've just been waiting for rates to go down or for demand to come back to the market to list them. But each day it feels like people are can't wait anymore. They can't wait anymore. And since the irony of the fact that the bond market's front run what the Fed did and mortgage rates are higher,
right.
you've got a whole lot of people looking around now going, oh no, what's happening? And so I think by that spring, people just cannot hold out for any longer because insurance and taxes are absolutely killing them. And I can talk to the political piece because they've already done what Harris is doing. You can go to Detroit right now. They have a $25,000 home down payment assistance. You can go to California and get $50,000. So they gave the state so much money, and this is exactly what they did. And we still have money. And so that 25,000, for instance, is not going to make any difference in terms of the housing market.
Okay, when you touched upon California, there are a few referendums. One
Mm-hmm.
is a sacred cow, right? The people that, what is a referendum? That people didn't have to pay higher assessed value
Prop
taxes.
13.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
and that could be negated, and that's mainly going to be people that are senior citizens that still hold a mortgage like that. Do you think that is has a chance of passing, and that'll exacerbate the situation in Cal?
Well, I think what's happening in California right now is all the speculation and investment, and they don't get homestead exemptions, and
Right.
also they bought in 21 and 22, and then you in 23, and you have the supplemental tax roll, which happens typically, almost a year after the purchase. And so I oversee mortgage client books, and what we saw was just this unbelievable wave of supplemental taxes that put people into default, even though they had just bought, and so I think because of the speculation and the fact that you're already seeing increased delinquency in that in 21, 22, and 23 are showing signs of delinquency already. Nothing is going to stop sort of the pain of this. The seniors who have lived there forever in California, I think they are more protected if
Okay.
you're living in your home and have been there forever. Yeah.
Okay. Well, in '08, it turned into a financial crisis with banks,
Mm-hmm.
and we had the backstop when SVB and the regionals were in trouble. Do you see this spreading into the banking sector? Everyone was just worried about commercial, but they felt okay about residential.
Yeah, so where I think the trouble's going to start, so I agree with you. Commercial is very concerning, and funnily enough, you've probably seen this, Dale. That little bank that just failed in Oklahoma, they only backstop 50% of the deposits, which is an interesting precedent, right? So, and
Sure
different
is.
from SVB. So, I think that commercial is absolutely a systemic risk, but the non-banks. So what happened after '08 and Dodd-Frank is the big bank said, you know what? Fine, we're out of mortgage. We're not going to play. You guys burned us so hard because the government game, Dale, is so hard to make money. There's just no money in it. It's just more about hedging other bets and things like that, and then just having those assets for other plays. And so the big banks got out and the non-banks came swooping in, and they don't have deposits. They just have those syndicated big, large lending facilities that they use. And so that is where I think your systemic crisis is
Okay.
going to come from. So your
Shadow
bank,
banks.
exactly, your shadow banks, but if you know them from the mortgage world, it's your Mr. Coopers, it's your Rockets, it's your United Wholesale. Like they are not prepared for what's coming. And Yellen herself has been out talking about this, the instability with the non-banks, which tells you, because what happened during COVID is when you had all of those banks, they were freaking out, the non-banks, because they have to advance all this money out to the trust. And when the government said you can be on forbearance, the non-banks were like, wait a minute, I don't have a facility to advance those funds. Luckily for them, origination went on steroids and they were able to make enough money to be able to afford that. But now that origination is down, they are in for some real trouble because you're going to have origination down as well as they're going to be advancing liquidity to the trust because people aren't paying. And I was doing loan level reviews. I do that every month on a sample because that's the only way you really know what's going on. And I could see already at servicers, the loss mitigation teams were falling way behind because we saw such a huge increase in early stage delinquency back in June. It's wavered back and forth since then, but we are now back up to those June levels. I know that's a lot, Dale.
No, I want to go back to this bank in Oklahoma that I wasn't aware of. So they only backed 50% of
Correct.
depositors' money. That to me is a bail-in.
Yeah. So yeah, I did a talk. My one of my friends, Nobody Special, really did the segment, and he kind of said it wasn't a bail-in because of the fact that you didn't kind of buy into the equity. But I don't have the technical definition of
Okay.
bail-in, but the fact that they stopped at the 50% and it's a tiny little bank, hardly any coverage, but it's a precedent, and I find it very interesting.
Yeah, I think that's something. So do you do research on safe banks?
Not unless there's something I'm looking at the moment.
Okay. All right. Or is that an oxymoron with
Yeah,
what
I
we're
think that's an
facing?
oxymoron. I don't, I went in I hadn't looked at Chase's 10Q in a year. And I just, after this last results where they took that such high provision and then also said, the consumer is fine. I was like, I got to go look at this myself. And I mean, if we had ever come out on the street with something like that, I mean, we would have been bankrupt overnight. And we did and got into, facilities, covenants were triggered. So we are just living on a wave of narrative right now. And the big banks and the small banks are all in jeopardy, in my opinion. But the non-bank sector is really, I think, the hugest risk we're looking at right now for known risks,
And
right?
and the Fed doesn't have as much impact on the shadow banking system. There's really nothing they could do about that. That's the
That's right.
real danger, right?
That's
And
right.
you also point to an area that I think gives a feel for the economy. If people aren't going to Vegas to gamble, that means they're starting to count their
The
chickens.
beans. That's
And so,
right.
and there's a sharp contraction in the service industry. That's all Vegas is. It's one
That's
big
right.
service industry. So what's happening there?
Yeah, so absolutely. I mean, the consumer is tapped out. I mean, there's just no doubt. And what's funny, Dale, is I was in Vegas in February of 23, one of my least favorite cities on the planet. And I was just driving around and I couldn't believe my eyes, all outside the outskirts of Vegas, up near, I think it's called,
Henderson.
yeah, well, not even Henderson. They had come up close to what's that big park? Anyway, kind of to the north, up in the mountains they were building, but they were building all this build to rent down below that, which was like for the serfs to live, that's what it looked
Yeah.
like. And it was just, and they were just building into the clouds, like right next to each other, these $4 million, $5 million homes that were squat and ugly. And And so, and I looked on, the listing sites like your Realtor, your Zillow. I was like, where are these properties? Where are they? They're nowhere. And so for 2 years, I've been waiting for this to show up in inventory, and it is happening, Dale. Like for the last 12 weeks, every week, Las Vegas is making another high in my tracking for inventory. And so, the consumers tapped out. Everybody's not moving to Vegas. All the retirees are not moving to Vegas. In fact, they had already built for any retiree that's going to move to Vegas. You can go and look at all those big 55 plus communities, which are mostly empty.
Wow.
So everybody thought a second home in Vegas. I mean, that place is in for a really tough cycle. But yeah, the consumers, they're tapped out. Even your top, 20% is tapped out. Now we're relying on your about top 1% to keep the economy going.
Okay, so I've heard this expression that we'll have deflation in things we own
Mm-hmm.
and inflation in things we use.
Hmm.
So what we own are stocks and real estate, at least the upper 20, like you're talking about,
Right.
and the especially the upper 1%. So what goes first, housing or equities?
That is
It's a tough
that
one,
is
right?
it's a tough one,
Maybe
and
they happen simultaneously.
maybe they do because I honestly just I think that what we're living on right now is total sugar,
Yeah,
and I think being pumped up for the election, and then I think
reality.
reality, right? And
Yeah.
so I have no connection with equities anymore. They just don't make any sense.
Okay.
And so, I mean, in that
Yeah.
regard, I mean, I can tell you what I think. I hate every time we get close to December because everybody's just trying to save their bonus for the next year and they'll do anything they can. And so I don't know if we're in that period yet or we're in a, looking at the yen, I'm getting a
Yeah.
little nervous right now. Like this is kind of an interesting step. So we could have an event, but there's so many forces at play to keep that from happening. But sometimes, the horse leaves the barn and there it is. But for housing, I honestly believe by the time, especially what we're seeing with the 10-year, it's very reminiscent to me of 2022 and those moves up. And that's when your builders and housing all sat there and went, okay, we're done. We are done.
Yeah.
So like it's over. So I think that probably at the end of this year, we're going to start to see more, we're going to see price declines accelerate. It's seasonal anyway. That should be happening. But I think we're going to start to see it accelerate. And then by the spring, again, people are going to have that second notch down of where is housing.
Okay.
And you had asked me earlier, what would I tell people to do? I would tell people that want to sell within the next year to go ahead and list because just list because you need to manage your expectations based on everything I've said about those inflated appraisals, that your Zestimate is likely not
Yeah.
accurate. And the only reason it's staying high is because there's no transactions.
Yeah.
And then once those accelerate, because you've got these builders are going to be slashing and burning here, and you've already seen articles in Builder magazine that they're doing that, then that's really these things are going to come down very quickly.
Okay. So this could be the major contributor, even people that are bullish everything, like in this everything bubble, say that there is going to be a deflationary period ahead of us before we really hyperinflate.
Mm.
So it's possible that real estate, since that's what people psychologically feel wealthy about still, even though it's delusional. What's the aftermath here, Melody? How many years is this going to be like an L type of bottom where we just, crash, or do we continue to erode for a decade? And for people that don't own property, when would be a good time for them to, this could be an opportunity for them.
Yeah, so I really saw this as being a 3 to 5 year play out scenario,
Okay.
with kind of things moderating after that. But the hurricanes have changed things. And
Okay.
because, one thing I managed to fault, I forgot to mention that I managed to fault during the crisis after I help manage our bankruptcy.
Yeah.
I got told to help with default. And I can tell you absolutely hurricanes, that kind of damage accelerate default. You can look at
Yeah.
Houston right now, who had about a 4.48% delinquency before Beryl. They're at a 6.6 delinquency handle, which is far above the average of around 3.82% right now. And you can also see it in counties in Arkansas and other places by Beryl. So I'm putting that analysis together because you had so many counties impacted with what happened with Helene and Milton, and also high ratios of short-term rentals that will no longer be able to be rented out, as well as here in East Tennessee,
Yes.
as well as here in Asheville and all along the Blue Ridge Parkway, where towns are gone. You know, their entire purpose was tourism, and this is our peak season. And so people really aren't talking about what an economic impact is going to have, because most people were not covered with
Yeah.
flood insurance.
Yeah. You have that stat that only 4%
That's
had
right.
flood insurance when FEMA says 99% of those areas flood.
Yeah, and counties are huge, right? And one, maybe it's only one little county that flooded, but you go to FEMA's website right now and look at the list of like natural disasters. I guarantee you there's probably 20 floods on there you knew nothing about, in places Brattleboro, Vermont recently flooded. Like that whole Vermont area, a lot of people don't know about that, but you'll go and see all these floods. And so certainly has you have a higher likelihood of flooding, especially with our aging infrastructure these days. So,
Yeah. Okay. And uh, I found it fascinating that the a hurricane in 1926 in Miami marked the top of
yes,
Florida residential real
yes,
estate. So
yes,
here we have history rhyming
correct.
again. It's also in 3 years prior to the
That's
worst
right.
type of economy experienced here.
Yes,
So I think that it's great that you're out there being a messenger right now, because if people heed what you're saying, can save them. You know, the old saying, home is where the heart is.
that's
I
right.
think it's going to be called home is where the heartache is. Right? We have to change
Yes,
this a little bit after talking to you, Melody. So I think that you're providing a service for people to and ground them so that perhaps they're not caught in the soup and stepping on landmines like people did 15 years ago.
that's right. I hope.
So, what a mission. And
Thank you.
and and I learned a lot from you today, Melody. I recommend. What's the best way? I saw you had something on Substack where people could follow your work.
Yes,
Also on X, it's at M3_Melody.
yes.
Uh,
And on
so
YouTube. Hmm.
you have a YouTube channel. So
Yeah,
I really enjoyed talking to you,
you
and
too.
really we'll have to do it again as things unfold, and
Absolutely.
really, really historic. So while we wrap it, is this going to be much worse than what we had in GFC one?
I think so. And I think it's GFC1 is just going to play out. I think it wasn't allowed to play out
I
last time.
I
And
hear you.
yeah,
Okay. All right. So we're, instead of delayed gratification, we're going to have delayed aggravation, right?
that's
Okay.
beautiful.
All right. Melody, right, everybody, and follow her, especially because I have a feeling Melody is right. So thank you very much, Melody, for coming here and sharing your time with us today. It was
Thank you
great.
again so much for having me.
All right, Melody Right, everyone. It's on also recorded. You could watch it again and play it for your realtor. Play it for your realtor. That's what I say. Take it easy, Melody.